morning. Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Reverend Sharon Wiley, Chalice's minister. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray. Welcome to this online worship service. For those of you who like to use the chat box during the service, which many of us are doing right now, and you're welcome to do, just be sure that when you post that you've opened that little blue menu that probably says panelists when you first look at it. If you drop it down, you can select panelists and attendees, and that's what you want. If you only post to the panelists, I'm the only panelist, and I probably won't see it during the worship service. And we want everyone to be able to see and read each other's posts. So this is me standing at the door of our little chapel on our little courtyard, greeting you on Sunday morning. Hello. Since I can't hug you myself, give yourself a big hug of hello for me. It's good. We need to be good and gentle with each other all the time, and during this pandemic especially. Now, I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice. In addition to this online worship, I want you to know that many of our groups and activities are happening online as well. Activities like our women's book club, our men's breakfast group, support groups, religious education for children, all of these and more are happening online using this Zoom meeting technology. You don't have to be a church member to participate in our groups and activities. They're open to everyone. So if you're new to Chalice and would like to learn more, you're invited to stay in this Zoom meeting after the service ends, and we'll use the chat box to chat together to answer any questions you might have. Now, let's take a breath together. We begin our service by acknowledging that wherever each of us is watching, if we are in what is now called the United States, then we are on land that has been stolen from indigenous peoples. Our congregational home in what is now called Escondido is on land that is part of the traditional territories of the 12 bands of the Kumeyaay Nation and the 7 bands of the Payom Kuchum, also called the Luiseno. Land that is sacred to us now as our church home was stolen from people for whom that land is also sacred. So as we continue to do our work as a community of shared faith, may we strive to build relationships with Kumeyaay and Payom Kuchum peoples, and may we find our way to right relationship with our local tribes. Now we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice was first used during World War II by the Unitarian Service Committee as a symbol of life-saving refuge for people fleeing persecution in Europe. May our chalice flame burn brightly, that all who are seeking may find us. In this season of celebration, we come together struggling. In this season of hope, we come together worried and doubtful. In this season of giving, we come together frightened and tired. May this hour together strengthen and nourish you. May this hour together be a blessing in hard times. May this hour together be a reminder of all that is good in the world. Let us worship together. Inspired by the Christian observance of Advent, we approach the winter holidays by lighting candles in the 4 weeks before Christmas. The tradition of Advent candles reaches back to pre-Christian Northern Europeans. During the darkest days of winter, they lit as many as 24 candles on an evergreen-covered wheel or wreath. By lighting a candle a day, they marked time, anticipating the return of the sun's light and warmth. Now we light candles to remind us of the gathering darkness and the blessings to be found in the many stories and symbols of this time of year. We light the third candle of Advent for joy. May it shine for all who recognize that we are stronger together than we are apart. Our Advent hymn this year is from our Teal hymnal, number 1046, Shall We Gather at the River? Please join in singing the first 3 verses for the first 3 Sundays of Advent.
Shall we gather at the river, where bright angel feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. On the margin of the river, washing up its silver spray, we will walk and worship ever all the happy golden day. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Ere we reach the shining river, lay we every burden down. Grace our spirits will deliver and provide a robe and a crown. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God.
Good morning. Last night, families around the world lit Hanukkah candles, lighting 3 candles for the 3rd night of the festival. So I bring this morning the practice of lighting candles to this Unitarian Universalist congregation, where many of us, like myself, have a Jewish background, or want to honor the Jewish holidays. The rabbis of the Talmud, well, they argued a lot, and one of the things they argued over was how one should light the Hanukkah lights. One rabbi and his school of thought that each night you should add an extra light, that on the first night you light one candle or lamp, and the second night you light two, and so on. Another school of thought said, no, you should start with 8 and get fewer and fewer as it goes on. So from 8 candles and lamps or lights to 7 and 6. Well, as you may have guessed, the school of thought about adding light won over time, that's what we do. And the rationale is that we should be increasing light. We should be increasing joy in the world. We should be bringing more light to darkness. I'm taking that to heart this year, that in a year where things have been hard, let's add light. Let's add joy. Let's add wonder. So whatever that looks like for you, may this be a season of increasing light and joy, warmth and connection during long nights. I'll sing the Hanukkah blessings in Hebrew, the first 2 blessings over the candle, and the third for the first time in a year where one does something. And since this is the first Sunday this year where we're lighting Hanukkah candles together, we'll sing that one as well. And following that, we'll say the English translation. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu le'adlik ner shel Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim hahem b'azman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'echianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Amen. Blessed are you, source of all, who brings moments of holiness to our lives through the ritual of lighting the Hanukkah lights. Blessed are you, source of all, who brings our attention to miracles from ages past to this very moment. Blessed are you, source of all, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this very moment. And let us say, Amen. Happy Hanukkah.
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by honoring our joys and sorrows. As many of you know, if you were at last Sunday's service, my mother passed away earlier this month, and I just want to say how held and grateful I felt for all the messages and cards I've received from those of you in the congregation. It has been a good time to feel part of a loving community, and I'm grateful for you. If you would like to share a joy or sorrow with the congregation this morning, now is the time for sharing in the chat box. We don't speak these out loud, but we share them in the chat. If you'd like to send me a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, you can please email me, and I'll put my email in the chat box.
all this joy, all this joy, all this sorrow, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is love, such is life, such is peace, such is peace, such is peace, such is love, such is love, all this joy, all this joy, all this sorrow, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is life, such is life, such is peace, such is peace, such is peace, such is peace, such is love, all this joy, all this joy, all this sorrow, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is life, such is life, such is peace, such is peace, such is peace, such is peace, such is love, such is love.
Our story is called Jabari Jumps, written and illustrated by Gaia Cornwall. I'm jumping off the diving board today, Jabari told his dad. Really? Said his dad. The diving board was high and maybe a little scary, but Jabari had finished his swimming lessons and passed his swim test, and now he was ready to jump. I'm a great jumper, said Jabari, so I'm not scared at all. Jabari watched the other kids climb the long ladder. They walked all the way out to the end of the board, as big as tiny bugs. Then they stood on the edge. They spread their arms and bent their knees and sprang up, up, up. And then they dove down, down, down. Splash! Looks easy, Jabari said. But when his dad squeezed his hand, Jabari squeezed back. Jabari stood at the bottom of the ladder. He looked up. You can go before me if you want, he told the kid behind him. I need to think about what kind of special jump I'm going to do. Jabari thought and thought. Jabari started to climb, up and up. The ladder is very tall, he thought. Are you okay? Called his dad. I'm just a little tired, said Jabari. Maybe you should climb down and take a tiny rest, said his dad. A tiny rest sounded like a good idea. When he got to the bottom, Jabari remembered something. I forgot to do my stretches, he said to his dad. Stretching is very important, said his dad. I think tomorrow might be a better day for jumping, Jabari said. They looked up at the diving board together. It's okay to feel a little scared, said his dad. Sometimes, if I feel a little scared, I take a deep breath and tell myself I am ready. And you know what? Sometimes it stops feeling scary and feels a little like a surprise. Jabari loved surprises. Jabari took a deep breath and felt it fill his body from the ends of his hair right down to the tips of his toes. Jabari looked up. He began to climb. Up and up and up and up until he got to the top. Jabari stood up straight. He walked all the way to the end of the board. His toes curled around the rough edge. Jabari looked out as far as he could see. He felt like he was ready. "I love surprises," he whispered. He took a deep breath and spread his arms and bent his knees. Then he sprang up off the board, flying. Jabari hit the water with a splash. Down, down, down he went. And then back up. Whoosh. "Jabari, you did it," said his dad. "I did it," said Jabari. "I'm a great jumper." "And you know what?" "What?" said his dad. "Surprise double backflip is next." The notion of Black fearsomeness and invulnerability requires its mirror image, the fantasy of white fragility. For centuries, white Americans have lived under a strange and contradictory delusion that Black bodies are incredibly strong and frightening and impervious to pain, that they can handle anything short of total destruction. But white bodies are extremely weak and vulnerable, especially to Black bodies. So it's the job of Black bodies to care for white bodies, soothe them and protect them, particularly from other Black bodies. White bodies have lived by this myth and allowed it to guide their behavior for many generations. Cognitively, the myth makes no sense. It boils down to, "I need you to protect me from you." But our bodies don't give a damn about sense. They accept whatever they feel will help them survive and stay safe. For hundreds of years, the myth has been reinforced by a second fantasy, which became the rationale for oppression and carnage. Because white bodies are so vulnerable to Black ones, when a Black body is not subservient to a white one, it must be brutalized or destroyed. There can be no mercy, no second thoughts, and no halfway measures. Because Black bodies are nearly invulnerable, that brutality and destruction must be swift and it must be ruthless. 2 centuries ago, there was a deliberate strategy behind these fantasies. It helped destroy solidarity between Black and white farmhands, created bonds between rich landowners and poor white workers, and enabled everyone to tell at a glance who was to be feared, who was to be served, and who was to do the serving. This strategy created a set of standards for how people were to interact and be with each other. Thus, over time, white body supremacy became the standard order of things. Historically, the myth was most visible on, but was not limited to, plantations where enslaved Africans served as cooks, wet nurses, nannies, and victims of sexual exploitation by white plantation owners and their families. We continue to see it just as systemically today in hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and childcare centers, where a high percentage of caregivers are Black. It is also no accident that in the 21st century, large numbers of African Americans work as cooks, private care nurses and aides, and prostitutes. Take a breath. It can be hard, hard to hear those litanies. Each church year, I pick a topic for a 10-part sermon series for us to study deeply together. And we call this our Spirit Study topic for the year. This year, we're working with the book I just read from, called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, written by trauma specialist Resmaa Menakem. Today is the 4th sermon in this series, and if you weren't here for the previous ones, they're all posted and available on our YouTube channel. This is our 6th year with a year-long spirit study topic, and more than any other year, I would happily just sit here and read you the book. Menakem's writing is accessible and persuasive. His ideas build on each other from chapter to chapter, and most importantly, he offers exercises in each chapter, encouraging you to listen to your body while you reflect on different experiences you've had. So they're like reflection questions combined with, sort of sensory, paying attention, mindfulness. Learning to listen to our bodies is an important part of beginning to heal trauma. So let's us go ahead and take a moment to tune into our bodies now. When we're listening, when we're watching something on screen, it's easy to ignore the body and to be sort of completely in our heads. So let's take a breath and feel your belly moving as you breathe in and out. Are you sitting comfortably? Or laying down or stretching or whatever it is you're doing while you listen? Do you have any aches or pains? I often find when I pay attention that I realize I'm sitting in a way that isn't fully comfortable, but I just haven't been paying attention. Are you warm or are you cold? Is there anything you need or want to do to make your body more comfortable? One of the reasons we want to strengthen how we listen to our bodies is so we can recognize what's happening in our bodies when we are in different situations. So one of Menakem's central points is that in the United States, we all have racialized trauma to process, especially white people and Black people, through our everyday existence as people in the United States, and through the physical impacts of trauma that get passed down through generations. So that history of trauma means that there are times and situations when we respond from our amygdala, sometimes called our lizard brain. We're familiar with this idea. We respond with one of the few choices available to us from our lizard brain, our most basic responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Listening to our bodies means we can start to better identify when that's happening. When we're tensed for fight, our heart racing, maybe our fists clenched. When we feel that urge to flee, when sort of everything in our body is pushing, or when we shut down and become frozen and often silent and non-communicative. Menakem spends some time retelling some of the scenes from police shootings of Black people, as well as police not shooting white people in similar situations. Menakem posits that police in these situations are often acting from their lizard brain responses to fight, even when that response is irrational and inappropriate to the situation. What we hear from police over and over again in those scenarios is that they felt afraid, they felt threatened, they felt afraid for their very lives. Certainly, police are sometimes in situations when they are genuinely being threatened, but we have many examples of police shootings when Black people did not have a weapon, were not being threatening, and were complying with instructions, yet were shot anyway. Menakem names these shootings as trauma-inspired responses. This does not absolve the police of their responsibility for their actions. We have to learn, we all have to learn not to respond from that place of our lizard brain. So I want to repeat the opening words from our reading just a few minutes ago. The notion of Black fearsomeness and invulnerability requires its mirror image, the fantasy of white fragility. For centuries, white Americans have lived under a strange and contradictory delusion, and this is the description of the delusion. Black bodies are incredibly strong and frightening and impervious to pain. They can handle anything short of total destruction. But white bodies are extremely weak and vulnerable, especially to Black bodies. So it's the job of Black bodies to care for white bodies, soothe them and protect them, particularly from other Black bodies. White bodies have lived by this myth and allowed it to guide their behavior for many generations. It's the end of the quote. The phrase white fragility has become well known these past few years since the 2018 publication of Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. Many of you just read that book together, guided by our transformation team. The white fragility described by Robin DiAngelo involves the strong and immediate defensive response whenever a white body is challenged on the subject of race and equity. As DiAngelo describes it, white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. These moves include the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation. That was quoting DiAngelo. Many of us who have participated in anti-racism work for some time have witnessed this white fragility, an outburst when the topic of racial equity comes up, defensiveness, tears sometimes, and often a retreat, the refusal to continue with the discussion. So now that we're becoming familiar with the work of Resmaa Menakem, how might we understand this behavior? What does it sound like? An amygdala response, fight and then flee. This is what Menakem calls unmetabolized trauma. He also calls it dirty pain. He argues that unhealed traumas often appear as overreactions to present events, reactions that seem wildly inappropriate to what's happening. This sounds like Robin DiAngelo's description of white fragility. Over time, unhealed wounds and their appearance as overreactions can become embedded in the body as standard ways of surviving and protecting itself. When this happens repeatedly over time, the trauma response can look like part of the person's personality. So this can also happen at a cultural level, with expressions of unhealed trauma appearing as a cultural characteristic. And this is part of how white body supremacy lives on in our culture. The trauma of our history of slavery in this country has not healed. It has not been addressed, has not been processed, has not been metabolized. And so it lives on, even in thoughtful liberal white people who think of ourselves as not racist, but can't bear to talk about racism. This is one of Menakem's key arguments, that unhealed racialized trauma gets passed down through generations. And this racialized trauma in the United States impacts white bodies and Black bodies especially. Now, we haven't begun to talk meaningfully yet about how to heal this trauma, so don't worry that you've missed it. I know we keep talking about metabolizing and healing, and we're not there yet. We're not at that part of the series. So right now we're still naming and describing the situation we're in, the world we're in. We're learning some new concepts and some new language and ideas for understanding the world around us. So you hear, I hope, that Robin DiAngelo and Resmaa Menakem aren't in conflict. They're just sort of a different angle of understanding some of the same behavior. They're actually, I think, very synchronous, very harmonious. But this is the point that Menakem wants to make about white fragility, and not just Robin DiAngelo's description of white fragility, but this larger idea that white bodies are fragile and need protection from Black bodies. Menakem's point is that this is simply a myth, a fantasy, a delusion. White bodies are not at all more fragile than Black bodies. White bodies do not need special protection from Black bodies, and police are not justified in being terrified of Black bodies. White people need to stop calling the police when they're in, non-threatening situations and yet feel scared because of the presence of Black bodies. These are myths and they must be discarded. Menakem notes that many Black people have internalized this myth of white fragility and learned to change themselves in order to protect white people. It's not unusual for Black people to speak differently around white people, to be conscious of how close they stand in somewhere like an elevator, or what side of the street they walk on, to try to avoid causing white people discomfort. Menakem writes of his own self-discovery about this. I recognize that I was enabling and colluding with white fragility and white body supremacy. Today, I afford white bodies exactly the same respect and space that I allow other bodies. It's the end of his quote. So he's saying he's stopped trying to change himself to protect white people. He sees that as being colluding with white fragility and white body supremacy. So this is his advice to all of us. Stop it. He writes, it's time for all of us to drop the facade of white fragility. It's absurd, it's patently untrue, and it harms everyone who encounters it. He concludes this section of his writing with these words, there is only one way through this stalemate. White Americans must accept, explore, and mend their centuries-old trauma around oppression and victimization. And that is the work that lays ahead of us. You're invited to join in singing.
Dark of winter, soft and still, your quiet call
promise me. And then my soul may hear a voice, a still small voice of love eternal. Darkness, when my fears arise, let your peace flow through me.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes our congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Christina Feldman writes, generosity lies at the heart of spiritual practice. Extending generosity to ourselves and others gladdens our heart, is a direct way of healing division, and brings joy. Please text your donation to Chalice. If you haven't texted a donation before, know that once you text the amount, the number, you'll get a reply with a link to follow to enter your credit card information. And after you've done that once, you don't need to do it again. If your Sunday donation is part of your pledge payment, please be sure to indicate the word pledge after the dollar amount. And you can make a text donation anytime. It doesn't need to be during the service. So the phone number will be on screen in just a moment, and I'll put it in the chat box as well. Please give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration.
We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love, to listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sky, it tells us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees. Look at the trees, they tell us we are here to be lifted in love. Look at the seas, they tell us we're here to be lifted in love. To listen to love as the flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love.
Our story today, Jabari Jumps, was about change and courage to do something new, to try something that seems scary. I chose that story because talking with white people about racism is almost always asking them to do something new. Not all white people, of course, but even in our liberal faith tradition, it is still true that for white people, learning about anti-racism still feels optional. White people get to choose whether or not we learn or keep learning about the current ways of thinking about and understanding racism, anti-racism, white supremacy, white body supremacy. Each of these words or phrases means something slightly different and is connected to different thinkers and writers right now. Yesterday in Washington, D.C., white supremacists ripped a Black Lives Matter banner off the building of a historically Black United Methodist congregation and lit that banner on fire in the street. There will be white people who say that that's racism, that's white supremacy. Those are the people who have learning to do. And that's true. But also consider, if liberal white people aren't willing to do the ongoing work of learning about white supremacy and how to dismantle it, if the most progressive among us, supposedly, aren't willing to take on this work, then who will? Because Black people are surely the leaders of this work, which is why we're reading and learning from Black authors, but Black people cannot accomplish this change on their own. We can't expect Black people to change the world on their own. This was a hard week again. Our democracy under attack again, still. January 20th will not be a magical day when everything is better. The future is as fraught as ever. It is up to us to build a better tomorrow. It is up to us to fix what is broken. It is up to us to work together and to join with other coalitions and alliances of people to keep working to heal these unhealed wounds. Ignoring them will not make them go away. We know because we tried ignoring them and it didn't work. The days grow shorter. The dark of night can seem scary. But this is the season of faith and hope. Faith that we have enough to sustain us through these hard times. Hope that change and transformation are possible and that a new world is coming. I encourage you in these coming weeks to remember these ancient stories, to comfort yourself with the traditions that soothe you, and to look forward to the better world that we are already building together. Please join in singing.
I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean. I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow. I've got pain like an arrow in my soul. I've got tears like the raindrops. I've got tears like the raindrops. I've got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got tears like the raindrops. I've got tears like the raindrops. I've got tears like the raindrops in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul.
Our closing words come from Jim Wickman. May our faith sustain us, our hope inspire us, and our love surround us as we go our separate ways, knowing that we will gather again in this beloved community. Amen, and blessed be. You're invited to close our time together by singing the well. After that, please return to your seats for a brief announcement about our upcoming church auction. Newcomers are also invited to stay here in the worship for a newcomer chat, and then everyone is invited to our coffee hour.